Alrighty. All right, great.
So let me introduce the people that are here again, Neil, and let you know that the dean is going to be popping in, Dean Patricia, at some point so she can see part of it. But we have Maureen Rust, who is an instruction librarian, Ping Fu, who's in technical services. We have Jerry Hopkins, who's multimodal, also involved with instruction, and Julie Carmen, who is in cataloging initiatives, and then you know me. Neil has been, Neil has been our instruction intern over at the Westside Library, so he's been working in Des Moines and Linwood, done 4 or 6 lessons, and then he's done some video recordings, a workshop, and he's been creating LibGuides for us as well. So he's got quite a bit of experience under his belt, and we are really happy with all the great work that he has done. So I'm excited for this presentation, and I think that's all the introduction that needs to be said. So, Neil, whenever you're ready.
Cool. Well, so can everyone see the slide here?
Yep.
All right, great. So I was offered this internship, I believe, back in January, and this experience has been really great. So I came to this internship without with really any work experience in a library setting. So the opportunity to do sort of teaching, instructional design, LibGuide building, and a lot of video editing has been really rewarding. And I'd like to take this opportunity to start a presentation to, one, thank Lizzie, Brenda, and Christine for offering me this position, and also for all the valuable feedback that they've given me over the quarter. So give yourself a hand. You guys did awesome. And I really couldn't have done this without you. So, although this workshop focuses a lot on, all my duties really as an instructor here have been on electronic resources and helping students use databases, for my final workshop and for my final presentation to such a distinguished panel, I wanted to go a little bit in a different direction. So my big passion when I came to the iSchool was teaching research. I believe that research should be the cornerstone of a higher education experience. I believe that it's not something, but from what I've seen both at kind of UW and in my teaching experiences here at CWU, it's something that a lot of students seem to kind of struggle grasping kind of the nuances and the necessary skills. And it also seems like in some of the kind of writing prompts I've seen, it's not a skill that faculty, it feels like, or some are not really kind of emphasizing as well as they should. So the models that people have been using have been a little bit muddied. So over the course of this quarter, I've been thinking about a possible model that we could use to introduce students to research and making faculty feel kind of more comfortable potentially using it in their courses. And I'm going to, in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about that model and about some of the LibGuides that I've done and what that data tells us about our role in sort of teaching students how to do research. So this is an activity that I saw in one of my classes at the University of Washington, and it's called Guaranteeing Failure. So the premise behind this activity is sometimes the only way to really learn how to do something right is to imagine all of the ways it can go wrong. So for this activity, I invite you all to reflect on the problems you've seen in student research and the problems you've seen with the prompts given to students for their research assignments. Now, unlike a conventional classroom, you guys are in a remote location. But don't worry about it, because I have a handy way that we're going to use to collaborate on coming up with some great examples of this. And that's through an app I've been using called Poll Everywhere. Okay, so once this loads, so can everyone see these instructions right here?
Yes.
Okay, so Poll Everywhere is a relatively new tool that I've found to be very useful in either conventional classroom instruction or dual modal teaching like this. So what you're going to do is it's basically a user-generated poll. So the audience can respond to the question during the failure activity either through this website, so it's pollev.com/neilp228, or you can do it through your smartphones. So you're going to text neilp228 to 37607 at any time to sort of join the presentation. So does anyone have any issues or sort of questions with that?
So Neil, do you want to move your cursor off the activate thing? And
Okay.
then Neil P228 is who we're texting it to, and we're texting that number to that address?
So audience text Neil P228 to the number 37607.
37607.
So yeah, I'm sorry if it looks a little small on this screen. I'm not really sure what you're seeing or if that's kind of a problem. But basically, what this
I got
does
an
is
error
it gives us an error message.
Message would like to send.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay, it's there now. First it gave me an error message, and then it did. We notice it's your first time participating. Your phone number is completely private, blah, blah, blah. So I'm there at polleverywhere.com.
Great. So what I want to do is, in this step, take a minute and reflect on an example you saw of sort of poor research practices in student writing. Like, what are some kind of common mistakes that you see in your day-to-day experience, either working with students or working with faculty?
With student writing,
Yeah.
there's a ton of them.
I figured we'd have some fun with this.
Okay, so I just sent grammar.
Okay. So when it comes in, it should appear on the screen. Yes, there we go.
Ah,
Students are sent to the
one.
library for resources we don't have available.
Awesome.
So yeah, this is something I've heard instructors at the University of Washington talk about as well. Lack of reading. Also a pretty good choice.
So are you guys going through the website, or are you
I did
texting?
the website.
Are those the two that are up there right
I
now on
have
the website?
Mine's the second one.
Yeah, you can either go through the website or it should work through texting. I also can link it up through a Twitter feed, but I don't personally have a Twitter account. Sorry.
Well, this says I just joined Mira Brock's session, grammar.
Oh, that's interesting.
I guess somebody's holding a session on grammar, and that's where mine just sent to. Maybe I'll leave this. Try again.
Okay, don't know how to cite sources. Also kind of a problem we've seen here a couple times. At least I've heard from a lot of faculty that, not using OWL Purdue properly or not having proper citations is an issue. Dependence on Google is also a really good one. Something that's come up during my database demos is oftentimes people think the answer is always on the internet, and sometimes
Mine didn't show up there at all. It showed up on Mira Brock's session.
Aw, Jerry. Is that a
I know. It's always me, isn't it?
Oh no, that's okay. If this works if this works, every time but one, I think we're winning at that point.
Well, it looks to me like everybody
Yeah.
else used the website, and I texted through did the 37607, texted to 37607.
That's what I did.
Ah, and yours is up there?
Yeah.
Huh. How come I went to somebody else's? Maybe
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Well, if it's as small as I see it on this screen, it doesn't look like it's very big. Would you like me to type it in somewhere?
No, you can see it.
We can see it.
see it.
We can
Okay.
see it. We can see everybody's but mine,
Yeah, but that's because it went to the wrong place.
because it went to Mira Brock's session, whoever she is. That's really weird, though. Why did it?
We would have popped up on her screen.
I know.
Talking about.
Random.
This is open source product.
Nice.
It's a free.
That's really cool.
But what we can
I like
see
the
from these,
idea.
right, is there's a common thread. You're all identifying that students are coming to to the libraries and to you for a lot of very diverse reasons that are hard to kind of address in student writing. So at least in terms of like teaching research. It's one of the things that I was reflecting about a little bit as I was preparing the lesson plan for this talk, and it's something that I've been learning over the course of my, like classes at UW. Really, that research, the skills needed to be a good researcher and the skills needed to be a good writer are two distinct things. So understand as librarians, we're not supposed to be we're not supposed to do the job of the professionals who work at the Writing Center. There's certain areas where that's kind of their field of expertise. But what I feel this does kind of tease out is that as research professionals, we can have a say in the student writing process as well, and we have our areas of expertise. So what I want to kind of stress here is there's room for us to kind of deploy our models about what we think student research should look like. And that we can do this without sort of stepping on the toes, for lack of a better word, of other professionals working at the university. So let's keep this in mind, but we're going to navigate back to a PowerPoint. So going off that impact, the next thing I wanted to talk about was some of the data I've been collecting from my LibGuides. So to stress again, this is the LibGuides I've put together. What's interesting to me is the number of spikes that sort of appear, let me move that cursor out of the way, as these guides are being used. So this right now is data from all the LibGuides I've done. These are the 4 listed below. And as you can see, there are consistent spiking patterns. So I would infer that, from this data, students are using this resource at the same time for probably the same purpose. And it probably corresponds to some kind of deadline that was pertinent to the course itself. But what I want to tease out from this sort of data I'm showing you is that reference librarians really do have an impact on sort of student writing and how students do in their classes. Like you can see, there's spikes all across the board for each guides that follow a relatively consistent pattern. And although I only have data from these particular guides, it's still worth noting that, like from what I've talked to with Lizzie, this pattern is probably pervasive in the other sort of LibGuides built on behalf of CWU. Another thing I wanted to tease out, if we look at a specific guide, is that student views are not confined to a home page. In other words, students are not only looking at these guides for links to the databases, but they also seem to be interested in the content we are putting up. So this is a LibGuide. This is actually the first LibGuide I built at Central Washington University, and it has 3 page components. One is a home page that has one search and like Boolean operators and some suggestions on like how students can start looking for primary sources, which was the assignment for this particular class. The other page is suggested databases and citation guides, which had the links to a bunch of databases that contained primary sources for their project. EDL 420 was for a class where the students were required to look up primary resources on Indian tribes in Washington State, like sort of Native Americans in either a modern context or from like early history or something they could use to devise a lesson plan for their students. As EDL indicates, it was an education course. But the point of this is that students are looking at suggested databases and citation guides, and students are also interested in sort of the Finding Primary Resources tab. So it's not that students are using these guides only to get to the databases themselves. As this kind of shows, they're actually interested in the content we're willing to put up. So, from my experience here, one could assume incorrectly that reference librarians and the resources we put out aren't being used. I think the data that I've collected over this internship, and I'm sure this is consistent with what you guys have seen at CWU, shows this not to be the case. That we do have a role to play in student research, and students are very happy to use the tools that we provide. So this is a discussion of findings. This PowerPoint will be available for download, but since I've already kind of covered this earlier, we don't need to go through it again. So when I was thinking about how you could put up a research guide that would be like targeted towards students using kind of valid methods, I was looking around for a model. One model I like very much is from a book, The Craft of Research, which is published through the University of Chicago Press by Wayne, Colomb, and Booth. In this book, they build a model for novice researchers that are just starting out, they don't really understand the process, and are sort of struggling with how do I write a research paper. They begin their model by identifying 5 core goals. They talk about the first goal is turning a vague interest into a problem readers believe is worth solving. These individuals were sort of instructors from the English department, the rhetoric department, and I believe another one was from the philosophy department, but they were collaborating on what were the kind of common research skills they'd learned in their years of teaching and writing. They identified a second core goal that said building an argument that establishes your credibility. This is, I think, something that students struggle a lot with once they get out of school. We expect them, of course, in student writing classes to write papers on behalf of faculty where all the expectations are known. What it would be good, I feel like one advantage of this model is it pushes students to think about writing as a professional project. That outside of their experience in an institute of higher education, any writing they do in a professional context will be evaluated by a variety of diverse readers with diverse expectations. And what this model does is sort of push the idea that research is shaped to the needs of your audience. And you have to keep that audience in your mind as you're building your argument. Number 3, I think, is really important. A section of this model devotes itself to showing how to thoughtfully anticipate the reservations and critiques of readers. So at this point, I got a little bit of a story to tell. In one of my undergraduate courses, one of my faculty was explaining about the first time he went to a major conference. So he was an expert in German history from the early 20th century. And, he was going around and introducing himself, and people would ask him, oh, what are you studying? And he'd say, well, I'm interested in kind of the Weimar, the social movements in the Weimar Republic in the early 20th century. And, usually the colleagues there, since this was a history conference, would make some comment either about someone who had published something in the field or ask him about his own work. And he was really stressed out that people were asking him all these questions until he saw something that changed his mind. So another colleague who came in later in the conference was going around and introducing himself as an expert in psychoanalytic German history. And what he noticed was, or at least my professor noticed, that every time this guy would explain his field, the person he was talking to would have a moment of pause. And instead of asking a question, would just look at him and be like, oh, good for you. And in that moment, it really clicked in my professor's mind that this was like the ultimate dismissal of scholarship. That for scholars and professionals, being interested in something requires sort of thoughtful and critical questions. It shows that you care about the work being produced. This is different from student writing because students are conditioned to associate criticism with bad grades, which they don't want. They want in a perfect world, right, there's some good feedback, but generally nothing's wrong with it. Whereas, in the real world or in a professional context, the sign that someone is critiquing your work is a sign that your work is valued. They believe it's impactful in some sense and that it's usable. So sort of an advantage of this research model is it conditions students to anticipate that thoughtful criticism is a part of the process and is not something that they should necessarily shy away from. The last 2 goals are creating an introduction and a conclusion that answers a so what question and revising writing with the target readers in mind. So for these 2 goals, for the last 2 goals, 4 and 5, these are more properly left sort of in the domain of the writing center. It would be sort of the more appropriate professional body that will handle these kinds of issues. But in terms of research, I think the first 3 are really relevant to the kind of help that librarians are expected to provide students. So we're getting, if you kind of refer back to our guaranteeing failure activity, I remember that 2 comments standing out. 1, that students try to use Google and the internet to solve all their source problems. And 2, students don't know how to properly cite things. If you look at kind of the craft of research goals, this directly resonates with the second one, that students in this case were not building their argument in a credible fashion, because as scholars, we expect you to use peer-reviewed proprietary databases, and we expect you to know how to cite things properly. So if you don't do that, you're kind of running afoul of this rule, and as a consequence, readers will take you less seriously. In an academic setting, this has consequences. In the professional world, it has more dire consequences. So one of the things I was thinking about with a crafted research model, which we're going to get into a little bit later, is as information professionals, we can look at goals at 1, 2, and 3 as areas where I believe we were able to make a positive intervention in students. That I believe we could take this model and use it to help students that are coming to reference librarians, or we can show this model to faculty and say these are some kind of goals that can guide your own research, your research projects that you're giving to students. So with that, I'm going to get into the model itself. So the crafted research has a really interesting way of going about answering these 3 problems. And it's through this model called topic, question, problem. Using this model is very simple, it's very kind of easy to implement, but it really does a great job getting results anywhere from undergraduate to graduate level. So the most basic point they start out is a topic. Their prompt just asks students to identify an interest. Could be, it could be anything from viruses to French history to Parisian culture, it really doesn't matter. At this step, it's just a question of what are you interested in or what do you want to study? From this sort of step, students identify students engaging with sources that are a little bit different from peer-reviewed content. Because you're only articulating an interest field, at this point, according to the authors, it is okay to skim through like Google, Wikipedia, kind of popular media consumption just to get a little bit of sense about what the topic is and what kind of questions you might start posing. This gets us to the second prompt of the model, questions. So the book, at this point, the book prompts students to ask questions about the topic. So they offer students, readers, a guide with some adverbs. Who, what, when, where, whether, and how. So for example, I am studying like French history and I want to understand how something happened, or I want to understand how Paris was selected as the capital of France, or why it was selected as the capital of France. So these questions and adverbs are a way to prompt students into getting at a question about the topic that it is sort of relevant or pursuant to their interests. And this is one of the things I like about this particular model, is it really accommodates a lot of kind of diverse student projects and diverse student need. One of the problems with sort of research models targeted at a specific discipline is it's hard to take, for example, like the research specifications of history and translate them into different fields because those fields may have different expectations. What this model really tries to do is provide something that encompasses a lot of different material and give it some more sort of depth. In the graduate student workshops I've attended where this model was taught, this versatility really resonates with students because they can look at, implementing a very kind of theoretical construct to their specific interest in a very targeted way. So the last step is called the problem step, and this is very tricky. So once students clear sort of the topic and the question step, they should begin to consult the secondary literature, because once you identify a question, at that point the onus is on them to start going through peer-reviewed journals and begin learning what other people have said about it. The problem step encourages students to establish the significance of the question they want to ask. So for example, if I'm interested, if my topic was French history and I want to know why was Paris named the capital, and I would be, at this point, start consulting the secondary literature and reading through like maybe a history of Paris, for example, or to understand like the origins of the city and why it was chosen by the French to sort of be the national center of France. The significance, though, is a way of attaching some kind of meaning to that question. Or as they put it, you can think of it as an opportunity cost. Sometimes there's an opportunity cost, like just the cost of not knowing or why someone else that's not you would care about it. This is an important step, but it's also a very tricky one because for different disciplines have different sort of standards for what is a significant research question or significant research discovery. In some academic disciplines, as all three of you know, sometimes just finding a new piece of information is considered sufficient. In most disciplines, for example, in my training in history, new information really isn't enough. You have to make some kind of argument or significance or show how this reshapes our understanding of a historical event in some particular way. So posing good problems demands careful work, and it is here where students really should be consulting with peers, faculty, and librarians. Because attaching a problem to a research question is really hard. You make a lot of mistakes midway through. Sometimes the problem you pose just isn't solvable, and sometimes it's hard to think of a problem. And it's in this step that we can make a positive intervention. If you look at topic and question, These are two relatively easy steps to follow. Topic really just says, think of a topic. Questions about the topic are also relatively easy to generate. It's only the problem step you start running into trouble. So sometimes the problem step may require students to go back and revise their question, or find a new topic, or develop kind of a new hypothesis about the paper they're working on. After determining the problem, the student finally articulates significance. In other words, why does this problem matter? And here I'm going to show you an example. So this is an example that I built. Topic: I'm studying internet usage. This would be considered a broad focus. In Somali communities, narrow focus. In Seattle, the targeted topic. So you can see, obviously, this is a much more refined question than you maybe might get students asking. But you can see I'm traveling down the same kind of progression we generally teach in research courses. I have a broad topic, internet usage, a narrower topic, and a narrower topic until I get to the point where I'm actually targeted to something specific I want to study. Having figured this out, I then develop a question. Because I want to learn how, this is a key adverb that they sort of use when they're teaching this model, they use technology to communicate. A broad question via email, cell phones, online message boards, or whatever you happen to be interested in, which is your narrower question. So this model, what students really should be doing is they're going from a big interest to a smaller one through these kind of incremental steps. Now, just because you have this topic and question settled doesn't mean that this process works exactly as it should. And they may have to go back and revise because they can't find literature or because it's just their initial hypothesis about maybe how the community was using these tools is wrong, but they still have somewhere to go and a very kind of clear framework to follow. And here's the significance piece. An NGO wants to communicate with this community but doesn't understand how. By learning how they communicate with each other, we can improve NGO's communication strategy or outreach strategy. So the cool thing about what this model pushes between topic, question, and significance is how versatile really significance can be. So the question here I came up here was pertinent to nonprofits. But I could come up with anything under the sun. This could be a prompt you could use in a MLIS paper. You could be doing this in some kind of commercial setting. For example, if I wanted to sell a communication tool or an app to this community, this research is relevant. So one of the advantages of this model is the amount of versatility that's built into it. Students can go from a topic to question and follow it along and then develop a significance that's pertinent to what they want to do. One of the things that I really appreciate about this versatility is it really respects the autonomy of the students that we're trying to teach. It's sort of it's the equivalent of saying that we want to teach you a model and a set of skills, but then what you do with those skills is really in your hands. And this, I think, is pursuant with what a lot of good librarianship should be focused about. I mean, one of the core values of our profession that I've learned through my education at the University of Washington is that it's not our job to sort of judge what people are doing with the resources they request from us. It's just our job to point them to how they get those resources and how to access these things in a timely and in an effective manner. This model really, I think, follows those kind of best practices because we're not really trying to steer students in a particular research direction or tell them you have to study X or Y. We're just saying this is a good way to kind of organize your thinking. And if you don't really know much about research, it gives a very kind of helpful prompt to address how one might either apply research methods to a student paper or how one might teach research to students, which is what I'm interested in doing in a professional context somewhere down the road. So what we're going to do now is a little bit of active experimentation. So it's your turn. So let's go back here. Okay. Okay, so is everyone still in the Pull Me Everywhere tool?
Yeah.
All right, so in 2 or 3 words, research topic. What do you want to learn about? Oh, hi, Brenda. Is it working all right on your phone or?
Yeah, I posted Neil, but it's not coming up.
Huh. Okay, hold on. Let me try this. Okay, so try. Do me a favor. Try again. This should come back.
Yes.
Question on that.
Okay.
You doing?
Ooh.
All right, we're getting there. So, this is a word cloud feature. So, if you typed one in and something else comes to mind, keep populating it. If I was doing this in a larger classroom, this would be a very, very big word cloud with a lot of different interests and kind of relevant things that you might study. And the one cool thing is you see how certain words become larger on the screen? This indicates that a response is being entered multiple times. So it indicates, in this case, that the audience, everyone at both at CWU, Christine and Brenda, is really interested in media.
Didn't go away.
I might be biasing our score a lot here, just because it's fun.
All right.
All right. Well, that's okay. It is a room of information professionals, so I would expect media to do very well.
Loping.
I must confess I'm not totally sure what loping is, but I'm excited to find out.
Mine had something about developing countries, so I think it just grabbed part of
and it
that
chopped it
word.
off.
So
Okay.
Dale should be some-
But as you can see, right, that we can really pick from anything on this list, and anything being populated here is a perfectly valid topic. So having done this, let's pick something and run with it. Let's go with like open access. That's a fun topic. So let's say I want to learn about open access. We will now go to, so I'm going to deactivate this poll. And we're going to start posing questions. Students can use like the adverbs above or really pose any questions that sort of pique your fancy. Okay, so once you, it should be pretty similar as the last time around. So let's start posing questions about open access. What are the kinds of things that interest you about open access? Really kind of anything under the sun sort of works.
Must have been great. Academic honesty. Academic honesty, no. Not that I know of.
So this poll obviously is a little different than the word cloud activity I had us do. The word cloud, while I really like it because it gets a lot of different responses from a lot of different students up on the screen at once, doesn't allow us to sort of post kind of coherent sentences because it's a word cloud. What this poll will allow you to do is post blurbs, sort of brief sentences that students can sort of articulate any question they like. So we can see like, what are the most valuable providers? What is open access? How is it accessible? What is a full text feature? Who uses open access? So any one of these sort of questions is really viable in this model that's being presented. It's just a matter of picking something out. So let's start with who uses open access. How can we kind of narrow that down to a specific group of users?
You mean rephrase the question or
Start narrowing it down into a question that would be easier to answer in 8 to 10 weeks.
okay.
So if we're thinking about who uses open access, can we kind of narrow that down even more? Students. And it actually is a good question. Like, the research on open access is a little bit mixed in terms of who uses it. I can speak from experience when I say that I personally use a lot of open access materials because I like the model. The University of Washington has finally built an open access repository in their system. So if you're publishing papers in UW, you may or may not have the option to post your findings to it. But there's a lot of things about this model that are very exciting and we just don't know about yet. Librarians with limited resources, students, faculty, school teachers. So all these are potential user groups. So how, a question could be at this point, how are school teachers using open access? Or how are faculty? How are students? So here you've added a narrower focus to a question and you've given students kind of an easy place to get started. Now after consulting this step, at this point, I would probably show a group of students how to start using the library databases to go about answering the question. So if we're talking about school teachers, for example, that would probably mean we would go through ERIC because it contains obviously a lot of information that's specific to education. But really depending on the kinds of questions that interest students, you can really kind of take the lecture in any direction you want to. At this point, you would probably just be showing students, okay, now that you have your topic and your question, and you've kind of narrowed it down a little bit, let me show you how these databases work and how you can cite this information in a convenient fashion. So let's take a question. How do how do faculty use open access tools? The last step that the craftive research model wants us to think about is problematizing that step and creating some kind of significance for being able to answer that question. This is obviously a very tricky thing to think about, but one thing that we can take at this moment is getting students to start thinking about it now. So let's get out of this. So our last poll, thinking about significance. So we think about the research question, how are faculty using open access? Why are some of the reasons that this question is important? Like what kind of things can we learn? Who might be able to use this information? How does answering this question help someone who's not the writer? Or how does it fulfill a need that's not, the curiosity of the person doing this research? That's really cool. It definitely, I think, would be helpful. I think open access is kind of one of those words right now that is very important to information professionals, but is not something everyone understands just yet. Lifelong learners, guides instruction to faculty on the use of open access products. This is obviously really important because sometimes work may be copyrighted in ways that are kind of unpredictable. It's one of the things I've been learning about this quarter. Copyright it's a really fascinating creature, but sometimes it's just really frustrating in terms of what is copyrighted and what can be shared and what can't be shared. So, this step really, in terms of attaching a significance to a research question, is in many ways the most demanding and takes the most work and the most patience. You may not, it requires you to have an acute understanding of the discipline itself, and sometimes, in some cases, that's just not practical. But this is also still a good thing for us, because it gives us really an opportunity, right, to partner with the faculty who do have an answer to why a question is significant. But you can see here, right, that a room full of students can all generate individual kind of responses to this. And all the things you guys posted are really cool questions. So hopefully someday you'll all publish research papers on it and I'll have a chance to read through it. So the thing that I like about this model as a teaching tool is just, as we've kind of demonstrated over this process, it has a lot of breadth to it. It'll cover a lot of different interests, accommodate students who are studying anything from history to marine biology in a way that's still relevant to what we know and what they want to do. So that close this out and migrate back to the PowerPoint. So this is the end of the presentation. I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to listen to my talk. And at this point, I would like to know if you have any questions for me, either about this internship or something you saw here.
I have a question. I have two questions. First,
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, this is Ping. So this tool, this
Poll everywhere.
all everywhere. So it's open source,
Yeah.
and so you can use it as a real-time response at a class. You know, you can receive a real-time response from students.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's what it does.
CWU is looking at some similar products. We have a task force. It's one product is widely used by CWU is Clicker,
Okay.
and we are still looking at that. I don't know. I can bring this to our ATAC meeting. You know, look at that. My question is. About this presentation, I'm a LITA Education Committee member. You know LITA Education. LITA is Library Information Technology Association. I'm a LITA Education Committee member. If you want to, submit this proposal to LITA Education, you want to teach a class nationwide. I don't know. If you want, you can submit. If your proposal is approved by our LITA Education Committee, then we can make arrangement for you to teach. Anyone who is interested in,
Research skills.
this presentation. So I don't know if you are interested in this or not.
Sure. Yeah, that actually sounds like a lot of
I
fun.
can send more information to you, so you can, I think this is an interesting topic, right? For reference libraries, for instruction libraries, I haven't seen this, so maybe you can submit your proposal, and it's good for you to, I know you are graduating next year, so I'm looking for a job. It's good for you,
Yeah.
You will be famous, Yeah, it's possible, It's possible. So, if you want to contact me, then I give you, a website. You go to LITA Education Committee as a website and submit your proposal. We will see if your proposal gets approved. Then we ALA. It's a ALA. Actually, it's American Library Association. Someone from the association will make arrangement for you. So I don't. It's anyway.
So he would do it kind of like a
More
webinar
if you
then.
need more information, I can let you know.
Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, Neil, I can get you in
Yeah.
contact with Ping
Yes.
or set that
Yeah.
introduction
Cool.
email up.
Do you guys want me to give you a quick demo about how to use this?
But I have a suggestion, like for your presentation, it seems to me too detailed, like a description there, for your,
Yeah, so
PowerPoint.
If you wanted to do that. you would-
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question
Yeah,
about your
sure.
presentation. I noticed that there was something about NGO, and I couldn't figure out what NGO was in your slide.
Oh, sorry. That was just shorthand for non-governmental organization.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure what that meant.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
And then I had a question about, so if you want to go back to, you were talking about, you create the question, you create the problem, and you create the importance or the significance. When
Yeah.
you're doing that process for students and outlaying it for them, do you think it matters whether you pose the question of what is the significance of this problem that you're investigating before they develop questions or after they develop questions?
So the model that I read about in the crafted research puts significance really at kind of the end of it. I think the reason they chose to do that was the authors felt that it was the hardest step in the process and the most difficult to really successfully articulate. If I was teaching students how to using this kind of model, I would probably encourage them to just really only start thinking about it once they had articulated a topic and a question. Significance is one of those things where it can change a lot during the course of a project depending on what you find. Mm-hmm. So if we go back to the example I put up of that non-governmental organization I was talking about, let's say, for example, that you decided you didn't want to do work for that non-governmental organization, but you were still interested in the question. It has applicate like that research that I was talking about, sort of how the Somali migrant communities here in Seattle use sort of technology to communicate, has lots of different implications, assuming you can successfully answer it. Mm-hmm. So I think what they were sort of more concerned about is getting students to the point where they have articulated a targeted question they can solve in the time that's been given them to do so. So like the question, for example, that I posed, you could have that be like a very kind of basic thing you could do in 8 to 10 weeks, or that's something you could spend 6 years on a dissertation on. It just depends on how much time you have, right? So if you were going to do like a reference interview with a student and you were teaching this model, you'd have to gather that information first. And then part of your assistance in the question stage, I think, would depend on what the students were telling you about the project and what they wanted to do with it.
Okay.
But I think you could it would be interesting to try doing it the other way. I have not personally had a chance to use this model on an undergraduate student yet. It's still like I'm still like in the thinking about it stage. I haven't had the chance to actually find some lab rats to test it out on. But if this is something you're interested in using, by all means go ahead and try. Like, it's the cool thing about models, really, as long as there are aspects from them that you like and you think work, try them.
Cool. Well, if we have no more questions, thank you, Neil, so much.
Thank you, Neil. Nice job.
Thanks. All right. This website that I'm using is also pretty easy to use. You just really have to create an account. You can get, like, as educators, the free accounts you get are really good. It's probably like more than sufficient for what your purposes would be. Like, you can do all this except on a bigger scale. It does have the option to add paid accounts, but it's not really, you're not paying for content that you absolutely need. It's just if you have a paid account, you can grade things, you can like create auto filters, which you don't really need, but they're like nice little add-on features. So that's all I got. Anyway, no, thank you guys so much for coming.